Hey, what's up, Los Angeles? Welcome to the Rams Skinny here on the LAFB network. Thank you all for joining us, as always, making us a part of your day. Special episode. They're all special. We like to think so, but special guest coming on with us. Sam Monson of Pro Football Focus is going to be joining us here in just a moment. But first and foremost, my good pal, Skinny T. What's up, brother? How we doing?
Doing fantastic. It's always exciting when you welcome in a guest into the show. You know, mixes it up a little bit. The weirdest thing for me is, though, I listen to the PFF podcast occasionally, and so when talking to a guy like Sam Monson, and then he's talking, I hear his words like they are. He sounds just like he does on the podcast. That's what I'm trying to say.
Sounds the same on the mic. Yeah,
it's crazy.
It's always on a mic, so I guess it makes sense. So excited to share with you guys good insight on the Rams offseason as we get on to that real quick. Got to pay the bills. Show is always brought to you by our friends at BetOnline. Head to betonline.ag. Today, use our promo code BELIEVE. That's BLEAV. Get you a 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Get in those futures bets for your Rams to win the Super Bowl, or Matthew Stafford to win the MVP, or Blake Corum to win Rookie of the Year, or Jared Verse, Defensive Rookie of the Year. All that can be found at betonline.ag. Once again, that promo code is BELIEVE, BLEAV. Tell them the guys at the Rams Skinny sent you. But with that, we'll keep the intro short and sweet. Let's just jump right in. Here's our interview with Sam Monson. Hey, what's going on, Ramley? Welcome back to a special episode of the Rams Skinny here on the LAFB network. Have a very special guest joining us to break down this Rams offseason, the draft, the schedule, all of it. He does everything NFL for Pro Football Focus. He's the lead NFL analyst and also the co-host of the PFF NFL Show. We had the delight to have him actually on our show on Radio Row back in Phoenix, I believe. But happy to have him back on here now virtually, Mr. Sam Monson. What's up, brother? How we doing? Thanks so much for joining the show.
No problem. I'm doing well. How about you guys?
Doing great. Skinny, how you doing?
Yeah, living the dream, Can't complain.
Yeah, here we are, the dream of the dead of May, the true off season here, as we try to scour through for content and whatnot. So we thanks for the time, Sam, to help us out on that. So just to get things rolling here, you look at this Rams off season, and we talked about it a bunch, me and Ryan here, about this kind of almost culture shift in kind of roster construction. And a lot of that was due to the retirement of Aaron Donald. And they took a very different approach in building the offensive trenches. We know about, the signings on the offensive line, and obviously adding even some depth at tight end and Colby Parkinson. Just want to get your thoughts on kind of the offseason this Rams have had, and maybe even a little bit of identity shift that we've seen from how they've built things.
Yeah, I mean, it was always going to be an interesting offseason for them because, for the first time in years since the Jared Goff pick, they had a first-round draft pick. And it was like, well, they haven't traded that away yet. It doesn't look like they want to trade that away based off the way they've been talking and the way they were kind of communicating what their strategy would be. But neither did it seem necessarily that they were just going to play the draft the normal way. Like they're always looking for the opportunity to zig when everyone else is zagging. And if they'd kind of gone away from trading those top picks for proven high-level players, it felt like, they were going to look for the next strategy. It wasn't just going to be playing it by the numbers and going conventional. And yet that's ultimately kind of what they ended up doing, is playing it about as conventionally as you're going to see. But it meant that there was this whole offseason of uncertainty. Like, what are the Rams going to do? What is this strategy going to look like? It's kind of the first year of a really different strategy from what they've been employing, during the FDM picks kind of run. And I think that made it one of the most interesting off seasons we've seen from them.
Yeah, definitely. They've kind of shifted their identity on offense. It seems like that they're going away from kind of a bit more of a finesse game, adding a couple of big bodies in the middle of the offensive line. Drafting Kyren Williams clone, Blake Corum. What are your thoughts on what this offense might look like and kind of the shift away from just kind of running 11 personnel? Maybe they're going to try some new formations.
Yeah, I mean, I think the offensive personnel is in a really good spot and kind of much clearer, much further along than the defense is. And they I think had an appreciation for last season's offensive line. Actually played pretty well. It looked like it was going to be a disaster on paper heading into the year, and it really wasn't. It was it was a pretty solid unit overall. Generally speaking, this team has gone as well as the offensive line has gone. And I think it would have been easy to kind of come out of last year and say, okay, actually, the offensive line's fine. We don't need to mess with it too much. And instead, they were aware that they probably overachieved last year and they needed to invest in that group and needed to, make some significant changes and try and make sure that that group was going to be a high level group again this year. With Matthew Stafford, at his age, they're only going to need the offensive line more as he gets even older. So I think that made a ton of sense. And yeah, between the receivers that they already have, Kupp, Puka Nacua, Kyren Williams was phenomenal. I love Blake Corum. I think he's an incredible running back as well. So you've got a real collection of skill position players across the board that can make an impact. And now an offensive line that's in much better shape to let them do that.
Yeah, Sam, sticking with the offense and, this time of year for us content creators, it's, rankings are our best friend, right? It sparks debate, gets people talking. And it always seems like, at least since he's been a Ram, that Matthew Stafford's, parallel within rankings is very roller coaster. Some people have him super high, some super low. Where do you stand with Matthew Stafford? And obviously part of this reformation, this offense is to protect and keep him upright at his age. And I think spot on what Ryan said, like they're definitely looking more towards this kind of a running smash mouth type defense. We talked about it, this lunch pail type offense that maybe we hadn't seen in the beginning of the McVay era, but you still have a quarterback that can absolutely sling it and still has one of the best arms in football. So what's your thoughts on Stafford and kind of where he resides within the hierarchy of NFL quarterbacks?
I think Stafford is broadly who he's always been, which is one of the most sort of physically talented quarterbacks in the NFL, one of the best arms out there, capable of making, any spectacular throw you want. But overall, the consistency is not always there. And sometimes you get these runs of Matthew Stafford that aren't as good as the what he's potentially capable of. But I think within the Rams offense, it's a better system. It's a better environment for him than any system he was in Detroit. So you get the same player, but with a higher baseline because of everything else around him. And then we've seen already with the Rams that he's capable of going on a run that can make the difference between winning and losing a Super Bowl. And that really, I think, is the ultimate kind of benefit to a guy like Matthew Stafford is, he may be a sort of top 10 quarterback as opposed to a top 5 or a top 3 guy, but he can go on a run where he looks like a top 3 quarterback and is capable of making all the throws that all those guys are able to make. And if he does that at the right time, that can be the difference between just getting to the playoffs, getting to the wild card and going on a run and getting into the Super Bowl.
Yeah, absolutely. Just pivoting over to the defensive side, pretty much wholesale changes based on Aaron Donald retiring, everything kind of centered around him. Whole new secondary, basically, kind of got a facelift there. Very young across the defensive line, adding Jared Verse, Braden Fisk, Kobie Turner in his second year, Byron Young in the second year. So it's all new up front. What are your thoughts on just kind of broadly on this off season for the Rams defense?
Yeah, incredibly young group. I like the collection of talent that they have. The players last year. Kobie Turner had a phenomenal second half of the season. Byron Young, I thought, was a really productive player as well. And I mean, he's old. He's old in pure terms, but he's young as a football player. Like, he hasn't actually got that much experience. And so for a guy that inexperienced, I think his athleticism, like, there's a really high ceiling there, even though he's quite an old player as a sort of young prospect. But what we don't know is what happens with no Aaron Donald in the lineup. And by that, I don't mean just taking Donald out of the picture. You lose his production, you lose his impact. But what you really do for the first time in a decade is you lose the attention that Donald takes every single week. And I think because he was still productive and still such a good player, it's sort of easy to overlook the level of attention that Aaron Donald got on a weekly basis. I mean, for every single game for the last probably 8, maybe more years, every single game started, the game plan was, how do we stop Aaron Donald destroying this game? Like, there are plays that aren't in the playbook for that week because you can't run them with Aaron Donald on the field. There are blocking schemes that don't get brought out that week because Aaron Donald destroys them. Like, there's entire elements of an opposing offense will not come out for a game against Aaron Donald. And that's how the week had started for every single team that was playing the Rams for, the past 10 years or so. That's all off the table now. Kobie Turner is a nice player, but now he's got to do it all without that happening, without Donald taking that attention on every single snap. If anything, that attention is going towards him now as the closest thing to a proven commodity on that defensive front. And that changes the entire picture that the whole defense is looking at on a weekly basis. And I think that's the thing we don't yet have a handle on, what impact that's going to have overall.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because we love what they did in the draft, specifically with the first 2 picks with Verse and Fisk. With maybe we'll get your takes on them here in a second, but we were a little more critical of what the Rams did defensively, prior to the draft and free agency, and knowing everything you just said of losing Aaron Donald and what he brings to the table. You mentioned even earlier how it seemed like the Rams knew that the offensive line kind of punched above their weight, so they went and really fortified that. Well, we thought the defense really punched above their weight last year, and what they were able to do when you look at outside of Aaron Donald, what they had at every level, and yet they were a competent defense. So we thought they could hopefully build upon that. And outside of adding, Cameron Curl on the back end, they really didn't do anything in the front 7 until the draft came up. So do you think this is a unit that can, it's hard to say build upon last year because you lose Donald, but do you think it's a defense that is a completely new look, also new defensive coordinator with Chris Shula, where it's going to be a lot of growing pains? Or do you think it's a unit that, I think can surprise people because it is a young, talented group that maybe is so new that they're just going to surprise people, kind of like they did last year?
Yeah, I mean, anytime you have that much tied up in that volume of young players, the baseline should never be that high, because the chances are, at least a couple of them are just not going to be the guys that you thought they were, or they're going to struggle. It's going to take some time. It's this sort of, it's a classic example of head versus heart. I like all the players that they brought in. I actually sort of, disproportionately brought in some of my favorite players. But as a collective, that gives you a group that I should love this group and say, yeah, they're going to be fantastic. I liked all these guys. You put them all together, it's going to be amazing. The chances are it's just not going to work that way, right? At least a couple of them just aren't going to, last year, Nick Hampton, I thought, was one of the best kind of low round sleeper type picks as a situational edge guy. So far, we've basically seen nothing from him, right? So if 1 or 2 of those guys have that kind of season, then you've got holes on the defensive line. It takes all of them having the high end of their capabilities together for you to get this overachieving defensive line, which is possible, but not one of the most likely things to happen.
Yeah.
So, you mentioned a few players that you really liked that they added to the team, through the draft or free agency. Who are your favorite Rams players that you think might make a big difference this year?
I love bringing back Darius Williams. That guy, as long as you play him outside, is a really, really good player, and has been every level of football that we've graded. He was amazing in college. He was really good right away in the NFL. It's just that he looks like a slot corner, and so teams put him at slot where he's not good. He's a weird example of a guy who just does not play the position that he looks like he should well, and actually plays another position way better. So the Rams obviously had him before. They should understand that now. So Darius Williams, keep him outside. You have a high-level NFL starting caliber corner. I like that as a move to bring him back, where, you're almost buying low on him, because the last team that brought him didn't seem to understand that. They put him in the slot. He wasn't good. They moved him back outside eventually, but the whole thing sort of felt like a failed experiment. The Rams get to cash in on that and bring back a guy where they should know what to do with him and be able to get the best version of him right away. Tre'Davious White, I like bringing in as a buy low, reclamation project. I mean, he does not look like the player that he used to be because of all the injuries at this point, but the kind of low cost, high upside potential of what he could be if he gets healthy over the course of an offseason, I think it's a great gamble to take, a great roll of the dice to have. So yeah, I think they've made some nice kind of savvy additions in that secondary.
Yeah. If Trey White can even play close to what Akhello Witherspoon did last year, which they took a chance on, then I think that's a net positive for the Rams. So looking at the draft, Sam, and we've mentioned it a little bit a few times, but taking out Fisk, you mentioned last year you really like Nick Hampton. Who are maybe a lower round guy that you think either you just really loved his tape, loved the prospect possibility, or that you think just fits well with this Ram scheme, whether offense or defensively, that maybe would surprise some people?
Yeah, I mean, we're not going too low in the draft, but I really like the third rounder, Cameron Kitchens, the safety from Miami. Didn't have a good year at all last year, but you go back a year before that and you got really high level tape from him. And last year, it was a kind of classic example of just how hard playing the safety position is, because, you know, it's kind of in the name, but when you make mistakes at safety, they're touchdowns. If you make mistakes on the defensive line or even at linebacker, it might be a big play, but it's probably not going to go the distance and be a touchdown. Like, it seemed like every mistake he made last season was resulting in a touchdown or a big play, and he was at the root of all of them. But I don't think they were necessarily a sort of like, here's a whole series of reasons that he can't play in the NFL. It's just, he had a whole bunch of bad plays, a whole bunch of mistakes that surfaced, you know, in a relatively short period of time together. And I think that kind of represents the low watermark of what he will be. Like, that's the worst he plays is last year. And you still got some high end play. You still have the NFL caliber of athlete and potential in there. So I think he's another kind of buy low candidate, right? A guy whose draft stock probably fell from maybe a first round talent to the third round because of a bad season. But safety is one of those volatile positions, and he could easily bounce back to being the best version of himself next year.
Yeah, excellent. So just kind of jumping to the Rams schedule. I might be crazy, but are the Seattle Seahawks going to be a tough out for the Rams this next year?
I mean, the Seahawks, yeah, like, I think that they're going to be a pretty good team. Like, they've had a good baseline, a strong baseline for years. Obviously, they got rid of Pete Carroll. That can go either way because of the kind of institution that he'd become there. But I think they've replaced him with a good coach, you know, a guy that should help that become a positive, if anything. You know, they're going to be running what I think is about to become, if not is right now, the kind of new in vogue defensive system, that McDonald system. Like, we're seeing that now. 5, maybe 6 teams are going to run some variant of that defense. And it's the one, like having Vic Fangio, there's a little bit of extra power to having the kind of chief exponent of that defensive scheme. Same thing here. You're getting the guy that's running it the best right now. You're getting the guy that kind of created the not the system, but the way of teaching it, the methodology behind it. And so you're probably going to get the best version of that defense. And you're adding it to a group that already has quite a lot of sort of talented, versatile defenders, guys like Devin Witherspoon, Leonard Williams. Like, there's some players there, I think, that could make that work and make that pretty good. And then the offense has enough talent, I think, assuming the interior of the offensive line can hold up, and their life just got a lot easier because Aaron Donald isn't there anymore. You know, I think the offense will be functional and good enough that they'll still be a pretty good team.
Yeah, I think it's going to be tough out. Should be a good division. Sam, we'll get you out of here on this. Really appreciate the time. You know, when you look at now, what are we going into? Year 8 with Sean McVay, I think. Okay. 7 or 8. When you just look at this Sean McVay, Les Snead era, and going back to kind of the whole rankings thing. So putting you on the spot here, but where do you kind of put Sean McVay and Les Snead in the hierarchy of NFL? I mean, I think just, you know, Les Snead's methodology of just how he does things and very different than the tilt of the NFL, and McVay, obviously, you know, known as an offensive guru, but I think just a good head coach leader overall. But them as a duo, where do you kind of rank them in the NFL?
Yeah, I think you have to rank them pretty highly. Maybe not amongst the very top 1 or 2, but probably in the second tier, like the top of the second tier down. They've shown the ability to kind of consistently do things well. They're, you know, very rarely are they a bad football team. They've also shown the ability to kind of recognize and fix mistakes, which is always a key element to ranking front offices, ranking head coaches. Like, a lot of teams would have, or a lot of coaches or general managers would have gone down with the ship with the Jared Goff thing, right? When they decided, all right, we put everything into this guy. We staked our reputation on it, and he's not the right guy. They would have either stuck with him or all gone down with that not being the answer. Instead, they were able to go, let's go get Matthew Stafford. Let's make a trade happen. Obviously, that paid off to the tune of the Super Bowl. But yeah, I think, I don't think you can rank them kind of quite with, the Chiefs because of some of the kind of consistency that they've had. But they're probably in the very next tier.
Yeah. Yeah. We always have that fun debate, especially the Niners being the Rams' biggest rival. It's always fun to go McVay versus Shanahan, Snead versus Lynch. But Sam, we really appreciate the time. Sam Monson, who is the co-host of the PFF NFL Show and the PFF lead NFL analyst. Thanks for the time, brother. Enjoy the offseason. I know it's still busy for you and everyone out there, but hopefully our cause pass again. So thanks so much.
Anytime, guys. Take it easy.